I've been hearing a lot about something called the Paleolithic Ketogenic Diet, and I decided to go check it out. Now, what is the Paleolithic Ketogenic Diet? It's basically a specific protocol made by a research group called Paleomedicina. Essentially, it is a very high fat, very strict carnivorous approach that also includes organ meats and a few other things. And the idea is to reverse intestinal permeability. Why? Because as Paleomedicina says, this is the root cause of all autoimmune diseases. And it seems to show. Using this protocol, this group has actually been able to reverse a number of diseases, including cancer, Crohn's, and even type 1 diabetes. That's right, there actually is some case studies showing this. But how exactly does it work, Justin? What exactly is intestinal permeability? The basic idea is that your gut houses a whole bunch of bacteria, takes care of a whole host of food, and many foods, yes, including the keto treats we all love and enjoy, actually disturb the gut, and specifically disturb the gut lining, and allow holes to be punched through it that can allow foreign material through the gut into the bloodstream. And when all the foreign material, such as, the ice cream you ate last night, when that foreign material goes from the gut into the bloodstream, your autoimmune responds to it because now there's a bunch of foreign invaders coming in and they need to protect their turf, right? Unfortunately, a lot of these particles coming in through the gut end up actually looking very similar to our own cells in our own bodies, such as the beta cells in our pancreas. And so your autoimmune response, your white blood cells are all trying to attack these foreign invaders, and inadvertently, they end up also attacking our own cells, again, including our beta cells. And this, in theory, is how autoimmune diseases happen, such as type 1 diabetes. If you get rid of all the food that is causing this intestinal permeability, this leaky gut, all these holes being punched in the gut and allowing this stuff to leak through, then you can finally heal. And when you finally heal, you can actually reverse the disease. That is the theory, at least. Now, with this approach, Paleomedicina has documented diabetics that have been able to actually not just reverse their diabetes, not just reverse their symptoms, but actually get off insulin entirely. That's right, actually completely get off insulin. Now, to be clear, this only happens for newly diagnosed diabetics who still have some beta cell function. So if you're like me and you've been having diabetes for a very long time now, and you basically have no beta cells left and you haven't for years and years and years, you won't be able to try this and get off insulin. But I have heard from many friends, from other people that have been doing this Paleolithic ketogenic diet, that their numbers are actually very well on this approach, including ones that are still on insulin. So I decided to check it out. I decided to do a 2-week experiment with the Paleolithic ketogenic diet to see what it's all about and to see what kind of effect it has. Now, what does that look like? Basically, it is meat. You eat meat, you eat organs, you eat salt, and almost nothing else. Because everything else, eggs, dairy, spices, supplements, almost everything other than meat impacts your gut permeability. You have to cut all of that out and stick to just meat, salt, water, and so on. And not only that, but it has to be high in fat because it's also ketogenic. So not only am I eating just meat for my meals and just seasoning it with salt and nothing else, but I also have to eat extra fat with it. And the specific ratio is 100 grams of meat with 35 grams of extra fat added in. And for me, that extra fat was either lard or fat trimmings. Because obviously you can't have dairy, because dairy is something that impacts the gut too, unfortunately. And you might be thinking, aha, Justin, got you. If you're only eating meat, then how are you correcting your lows? Don't you need some sugar for that? Yes, you're right. Actually, the way to do that would be through raw honey, as mentioned by Vlad in my interview where he is doing this same approach himself. He uses raw honey because apparently that does not impact intestinal permeability as much as other things, as much as other sources of sugar. Meat, salt, water, correct lows, with honey, and you want 35 grams of fat per 100 grams of meat. I decided to be as stickler about this as possible, and just 2 meals a day, every meal 100 grams of meat, 35 grams of fat through steak and fat trimmings. That's how I did it. And I try to follow this to a T in order to give you the best, most accurate testimony possible. And here it is. First off, one thing I noticed very fast was that my basal needs dropped significantly. Like, when I started, my basal was 11 units of Tresiba every night, just one dose a night. And I expected to go down a little bit, right? Because I was eating a little bit less food. I wasn't eating the dairy anymore. I know it has some impact on your insulin needs. What I didn't realize was how much it impacted me. It went down to about 9 after the first couple days, and I was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. But then it just kept going, down to 7, 6, 5, and eventually a week later, a week after starting, I was down to 4 units of basal a day. That's just 1/6 of a unit per hour. That is the lowest I have ever had my basal, ever. And I was actually very surprised by this. It's been stuck at 4 ever since, so it's not like I ever hit 0, unfortunately. But it is very interesting that my basal needs dropped so dramatically when before I was actually doing a mostly carnivorous approach already. It's very interesting. Now, with that though, I had a lot of lows. Because, of course, when your basal keeps dropping, that means you're taking too much insulin, that means you're going too low. And so I was gorging on honey nonstop like I was a bear in spring. And that wasn't very fun. I did like the honey, but it wasn't fun having to correct lows all the time. Not only that, but my energy suffered too. Now, it might have been more from caffeine withdrawal because I was no longer drinking Diet Coke or coffee, but it was a problem nonetheless. My energy is mostly back now that I'm sort of weaned myself off of those 2 weeks later, but I do miss my coffee, right? So another big benefit was that my blood sugars were stellar most of the time. Now, there were a few highs and lows, of course. There were some lows, as I mentioned, but it was very rare for me to go over 120, even rarer than it was before, and I already had pretty good control. I was able to keep a flat line most of the time despite the lows, and interestingly enough, the honey never made me spike once. It brought me up gradually and didn't bring me up too high, even once, which is very interesting. So I was able to actually keep a flat line pretty well throughout most of this journey, which is very nice. And I think it has either to do with the lower protein and higher fat, making it so that the protein rises were slower and smaller, or, as the theory goes, it could be that since my intestinal permeability was improved, I was actually able to produce a little bit of insulin. Wouldn't that be nice? I don't know, but either way, my basal was reduced a ton, and my numbers were amazing for most of this. I was able to take a little bit less bolus, but of course I was eating less, so that makes sense. Now, the biggest con with this approach was that it is incredibly inconvenient, unfortunately. See, not only is it super duper strict in that you can only have meat, you can only have salt, you can only drink water, no seasonings, no supplements, nada. Even with that, you also have to have extra fat. And it's hard to find good sources of fat when you are in America, especially. You have to get fat trimmings from somewhere, or have to get bone marrow. You can't get just butter from the store, or you have to get some lard you saved up. It's hard to get the extra fat, and not only that, but you have to incorporate organs at least once a week. You have to incorporate a good amount too. And for us in the States, can be pretty difficult to find organ meat. I was able to go to a Mexican grocery store, an international grocery store, and also to my butcher to find some good organ meats and some fat trimmings. But for most people, it's pretty difficult. I will say I did eat some organ meats. I stuck with 100%. I ate tripe, which is the stomach lining. I ate liver, and I ate heart. So I kept to it as best as I could. But in doing so, having to pursue those organ meats and also even having to eat them, they're not very palatable compared to steak. There's a reason we like steak more than liver in America. It tastes a lot better. It was just not very convenient. It was certainly less convenient than what I was doing before. And not only that, but there are many times where I tested my blood sugar and it was way too high because I had honey on my fingers from using honey to correct the low. So in the end, is it worth it? For me, I mean, my basal went lower, my blood sugars pretty good, but my blood sugars were already pretty good, and I don't have any other autoimmune issues that this could help with necessarily. Yeah, it was nice, but honestly, when you weigh the pros and the cons, for me, it wasn't quite worth it. And so I'm going to discontinue the experiment after doing this for a full 2 weeks. Now, you, on the other hand, might be different. Since my basal dropped so low, I am honestly convinced that this approach really can wean some people off of insulin. If you're newly diagnosed, if you're still in your honeymoon period, if you're LADA and you still have some beta cell function, there is a chance you can get off of your insulin. And that's a big deal because not only do you not have to rely on the pharmaceutical companies anymore, but also you no longer have to worry about all the micromanagement that comes with injecting insulin for all your meals. You can let your body do the work for you, and all you have to do is eat a very strict and certain way. It's a big drawback, but I think it's worth it if you can get off insulin. Or if you have an autoimmune disease that Paleolithic Ketogenic might be good for, and I'll give a link below to the website and below to Meat Heals so you can see what kind of diseases are good for this approach. If you have another issue that needs to be dealt with and can be in such a way, that might be worth it too. Or, of course, if your numbers still aren't that good with carnivore, keto, whatever you're doing, and you want something that's even better, might be worth it considering as well. For me, since I already have good numbers, so I don't have any autoimmune issues, and I have no chance of getting all my beta cell function back and getting off insulin, it's not quite worth it for me. But for you, it might be, and especially if you're new diagnosed, I would consider it. All in all, this diet wasn't that bad. It was restrictive, it was a little hard to maintain, but once I got used to it, it was pretty easy, and I never really got hungry either. If you're doing this yourself, be sure to comment below and give your thoughts. If you'd like to try it yourself and have any questions, again, ask away. Just whatever way you decide to tame type 1, it's all about your preference. If it's worth it to you, give it a go. If you'd rather have some more variety, if you'd rather have some planting in there, or just have a relaxed carnivore approach, which is what I'm going to go back to myself, and you can tame type 1 that way, then that's fine too. As long as you're taming your type 1 and you have your priorities are straight, you'll be doing just fine.